Thank you, Nayla. And thank you to all the folks from the Watershed Council for having me. I really appreciate it. It's not every day that I get to stand up and talk nonstop about salamanders. And it certainly isn't every day that I get to stand up and talk nonstop about salamanders with a beer. That never happens, okay? So I'm really excited about it. The title, Breathless, Celebrating Salamanders in Their Small Wild Spaces, is actually the working title of a book that I'm working on now with a co-author, artist, Emily Poole. You'll be seeing her later on in the talk. You are so far on the cutting edge right now because this book isn't due out until 2027. So this is essentially the very first talk that I've ever given related to this project, all right? So I hope you enjoy it. I always like to start to set the tone appropriately. Are there any kids in the audience? You're all kids. I mean, come on. We're having fun, right? If you're not talking herpetology to your kids, who is? I think I've always loved that, even though that's really tortoises and this is a salamander talk. So where are we going? We're going to start out with a little Amphibians 101, and you might learn a little bit along the way. I need to set the stage for what I'm going to talk about later on because, well, you need just some basic biology to understand stuff. And then I've broken the rest of the talk out into a series of stories. And they're breathtaking 1, 2, 3, 4. And they have actual full titles there to go with them. Story is the oldest method that we have of communicating with one another. I love story. I talk in stories. We all talk in stories. And I thought that would be a lot more fun than me just standing up here and doing a salamander biology spew. So let's start with amphibian skin. There's a dun salamander sitting maybe in my hand. A lungless salamander, by the way. You'll be hearing more about them later. So what comes to mind when you think about an amphibian skin? Tell me. What do you think about it?
Sticky.
Did someone say moist? I heard moist. I heard sticky. Yeah, slimy? Slimy's good. How about warm? Cool, smooth, great, yeah. So those are all really great descriptors, and this is basically my list too. Cool, moist, slimy, and smooth. And so obviously we want to know why that is. So there's a cross-section, kind of a cartoon, of an amphibian skin, and what you'll notice there, I don't know if my pointer is going to point. Yeah, there we go. So the first thing to notice is all of these glands, and those came up in your trivia questions. By the way, it's kind of weird to have that trivia exam and have everyone hating on you before you even get up and take the mic. I really apologize for those questions. My students hated me for my multiple choice questions, so you get to hate me a little bit too. So all of these glands, hedonic glands really produce pheromones. Granular glands are producing poisons or toxins. And these mucus glands, this kind of vase-shaped thing right here, making slime. That's what they do. It's a very complex skin, far more complex than yours, by the way. And the other interesting thing are these capillaries. They come right up to the surface. You can see them cross-sectioned here. So there's a lot of capillary blood flow going to that skin. And then the last really important feature is that thin layer right there along the top. That's called, the fancy name for that is the stratum corneum. And essentially what that is the same stuff that your fingernails are made out of, and the point there is it's really thin. It's very thin compared to a reptile, for example, or compared to us. We have a much thicker stratum corneum than a salamander does. They shed that, but you never really notice because it all just kind of sloughs off in pieces, usually like a sunburner in the water, but they do need to shed it. So that's important, and you'll see why. So what we're talking about here really is this skin that's really good at exchanging water with the environment, because that stratum corneum is so thin, it's not a barrier to water, and it's not a barrier to gases either. And remember those capillaries that came right up next to the surface, those are important when it comes to absorbing oxygen through that skin, and they can also get rid of carbon dioxide going the other direction because that skin is so thin. But it's really lousy, it really sucks at hanging on to water. So amphibians dry out very easily. That has huge implications for them and where they're found. There's that really complex dermis with all those glands that make slime, and they make poisons, and they make pheromones. And finally, take home, amphibians will always lose water through their skin unless they're in contact with either something that's completely saturated. They're either in the water or they're in a really wet, rotten log or in moist soil. They'll always dry out. They're always going to lose water. Eggs, more cartoons. So the bottom line here, you don't need to worry so much about the names, but these are just essentially jelly layers around the egg. The most important feature, so there's a frog, and it's a real simple round thing, and there's a salamander, and some salamanders have stalked eggs, but not all of them have stalked eggs. But none of these eggs have a shell. There's no shell. You won't find one anywhere, and you won't find a host of other membranes that happen in, for example, our eggs, human eggs, mammalian eggs, just those jelly layers. So they're real live eggs. Those are northwestern salamander eggs, and they're going to be a star of the show later on. And that jelly mass right there is, you'll notice, attached to a stick, and it's about the size of a softball. And there are a bunch of embryos inside that. And so amphibian eggs, to just recap, they don't have a shell, they dry out really easily, they have to be deposited either in water or in a moist habitat, say in a rotten log or underground in a talus slope somewhere where they won't dry out. So salamanders are really closely tied to water in all its forms. So it's completely appropriate for me to be standing up here talking about salamanders with a beer, by the way, for the Coast Fork Watershed Council. Thank you again for having me. And the water can be either in that form, that's Upper Smith River, just to the west of us here a little ways, or it might just be a rotten log somewhere. So, when you look at rainfall in the state of Oregon, this is from the Atlas of Oregon, purple and violet, I guess, that's a lot of rainfall, and orange and yellow, not so much. It's rocket science, right? It rains around here. All those storms come in off the Pacific out here on the west. Usually they're coming in the winter from the southwest, and they're dropping tons of rain, and especially as they rise in elevation, hit the tops of the Coast Range. So there are places in the Coast Range, like up around Mount Hebo, around Tillamook in that area, 100 inches of rain a year. And they've been getting 100 inches of rain a year a long time before Prozac was invented, I might add. So that all that rainfall hits the Cascade Crest, and then it just dries out immediately. And you can see that when you drive over Highway 58, right? All of a sudden you hit that pine forest and it's dry, and your nose dries out, and you start getting nosebleeds, and your skin chaps, and it's just a whole different world. The salamanders know all that. So in Oregon, we have the highest amphibian diversity where there's most water. That's in the Coast Range. And the highest, and the second highest, near second highest, is in the Cascades. Now, as for trivia question number 5, I didn't know the answer to that when I wrote the question. So I had to change my mind a little bit. And unfortunately for you, Nail and Company were on top of it, and they managed to revise the question so that you had a choice of A and B, the Coast Range or the Cascades, for the highest salamander diversity, not just amphibian diversity. And in fact, salamander diversity is dead even between the Cascades and the Coast Range. There's 13 species in each of those places. So water is good for salamanders. And so you see distributions like this. This is dun salamander, a lungless salamander, that same one that we saw earlier. And you see that their range goes right up to the Cascade Crest, and it stops. It actually goes further north into Washington and down into Northern California a bit as well, but you see that they're just absolutely tied to water. This is fake, by the way, and I embarrassingly have to admit that it's off of my website. There should be a donut hole in that range for the Willamette Valley, because you won't find a dun salamander on the valley floor, only in the Coast Range and in the Cascades. They really need cool seeps and moss and that kind of thing, habitats that we don't have in the valley, on the valley floor. And then this is, I'll give you a couple of seconds just to memorize that. This is a tree, an evolutionary tree of salamander families. And I put it up here mostly to make the point that these families can be found even just west of here in the Coast Range. You can find the salamanders, the newts, the giant salamanders, the torrent salamanders, the lungless salamanders. There's 150 million years of evolution that separates those different lineages of salamanders. They've been around a long time. Long time. All right, on to our first breathtaking story. Denizens of Decay. I didn't really steal this title. It's the title of an essay that I wrote for a collection called Forest Understory about this animal right here, the Oregon slender salamander, and you'll see why I called them the denizens of decay here in a bit. But beautiful animals. They're about that long. You will get an A in this class if you just come up later and tell me how much you love them. Because I love them. They're my favorite salamander, okay? They're about that long, and they have this really pretty herringbone pattern along the back. They're long, slender, they have short legs. They're very appropriately named. They're actually a little on the stocky side for groups of slender salamanders. The whole group of slender salamanders tends to be a lot more slender than these are. So anyway, there's our slender salamander, and they are found in mature / old growth coniferous forest on the west flank of the Cascades. And so there's their range right there. I heard someone shout out in protest, "Salamanders don't recognize state lines." This one does. They go right up to the Columbia River Gorge and stop. I do not know why they don't like Washington. They just don't, okay? And so it's our only endemic Oregon amphibian. And yes, I have sent the letter to the Oregon State Legislature requesting that they consider it as our state amphibian, because we do not have one. For some reason, they haven't gotten back to me, but they will. More letters. The slender salamander, completely lungless. That sounds really weird, doesn't it? They have no lungs. And so it is true that they get all of their oxygen through their skin, but also through the lining of their mouth, because they have openings, they have nose openings, and they do get some oxygen through that mucosa around the mouth. It sounds really weird, except the most speciose family of salamanders in the world, they're lungless. There are more species of lungless salamanders than any other family in the world. Something's working for them, okay? And it happened a long time ago that they lost those lungs. So the other really interesting thing is they can live and reproduce without any freestanding water. And how do they do that? he asks, rhetorically. They do it because of this thing called direct development. And it works like this. First of all, decayed wood is absolutely critical in their habitat. This is why they tend to be found in old growth, mature type situations, because there's a lot of rotten wood there in various decay classes. They need that stuff. And that's because it sucks up water in the wet season and it holds it right through the dry season. So imagine this salamander, well, we'll get to that. The other thing is it's just squirming with invertebrates. And those are salamander smorgasbord. They love them. So they have plenty of food. They have a moist place to hang out all year long, really. And in some cases, a slender salamander won't go any further than just the area right around its home log. They have a very restricted home range. They lay their eggs in those logs. Now think about that for a second. I just told you earlier that those eggs have to have a moist place to be, right? And otherwise they dry out, they die. When that salamander lays her eggs, she can't just go pick them up and move them later. So she has to be deep enough in that log that she knows they're going to stay hydrated over the course of development, which is going to be months, and it happens over the summer. So it's absolutely critical that they get those decayed logs to deposit their eggs. Other salamanders can do it differently. They don't need decayed wood, but they need at least a deep talus slope to put their eggs into so that they don't dry out. The embryos have gills, back to the trivia question. They're right there. But they actually go through metamorphosis inside the egg. Yeah, it's true. And so what happens then is they hatch out into this little salamandrate that's fully terrestrial, and they never need freestanding water to breathe. And if you think the adults are cute, check out one of those old, they are amazing. So, and this is true, this pattern of reproduction, direct development, for all Oregon lungless salamanders. Now it's true that there are lungless salamanders in the eastern United States that do have an aquatic larval period, but none of ours do. They all have direct development. Breathtaking story number 2. 3, sorry, we're on 3? How did we get to 3? I think I jumped ahead. I have a typo. Just because I was writing this talk up until 4 o'clock this afternoon. I mean, how could anything get past me? Cool Jelly is the name of it's the title of a chapter in the book. And the star of the show is the northwestern salamander. And yes, they are around here. They are second largest salamander in the state. The largest salamander in the state is the coastal giant salamander. And by the way, the coastal giant salamander is the largest terrestrial salamander in the world. There are bigger aquatic ones, but they're the biggest terrestrial salamander in the world. And oh, by the way, because I'm not going to say anything about it later, yes, it's true that the coastal giant salamander can reproduce without metamorphosing. So it's almost like the opposite of direct development. They hatch out into a larva that never metamorphoses, and they get big. I mean, like that. You probably maybe seen them. Some of you that fish might have accidentally hooked into one, you know. And they can reproduce like that. They become sexually mature that way. So, but northwestern salamanders, they do lay eggs. They're big animals. They have, my wife Kim says they look like space monsters. And that's mainly, she's saying that because of these big parotid glands on the side of the head that exude a mild toxin that's really an anti-predator compound that's not necessarily, not dangerous to you. We'll get to that later. So the adults migrate to ponds in mid to late winter to breed, and the males and the females they court, and they go into this thing called amplexus, which is not copulation, but they're basically, in this case, the male's grasping the female from above, and he's going to put this thing down called a spermatophore. So here is a diagram of a salamander that's not the northwestern salamander, but closely related. the line salamander, and it's right here, the male's going, he's clasping the female, and once he's decided that she thinks he's a good idea, he's going to put down a spermatophore on the bottom of the pond. And that spermatophore, you can't really see the scale probably from there, but that right there is 2.5 millimeters. So it's a tiny little thing, and it's a gelatinous mushroom-shaped structure with a sperm cap on top. And the females are very talented. They can actually swing by and pluck that sperm cap off with their cloaca, which is that common reproductive opening, and reproductive and excretory opening. And so the bottom line there is that fertilization's internal, but they don't copulate. So all of our salamanders in Oregon have internal fertilization. Then this happens. They lay eggs. And this is my co-author, Emily, right here with a northwestern salamander egg mass in her hands. And here's what she said when she had that thing in her hands. "I could hold this all day." That's what she said.
You got an A.
She got an A. And here it is close up. And there's a couple of things, and I'll talk about a little later, but notice how it's kind of pockmarked right there and like over here, and it's just sort of concave around the outside. That's where a rough-skinned newt has come around and glommed onto that egg mass and eaten those embryos. So that's egg predation. Notice it only happens on the outside. That's an important consideration, okay? So there's a question. How does something that size come out of a salamander that long? Lamaze. The answer is it doesn't really. It's a whole lot smaller. It's just a string of jelly, and she wraps that thing around a submerged twig or a blade of submerged grass or whatever, and it just sucks up water and swells like crazy, and that's how come it ends up softball size in the end. So there's some of Emily's artwork for the book, and she's done a really great job here of illustrating an egg mass, and what she's trying to show here is on the left an early season egg mass, and then over here on the right is the same egg mass later in the year, later in the season, like later in the spring. So and you'll notice that thing is, first of all, it's turning green. And also she's done a good job of showing where the newts have been chewing on the outside of that thing. So that jelly mass is great for repelling egg predators, like rough-skinned newts especially. But it also actually, back to your trivia questions, it does reduce the amount of oxygen that can reach the inside of that egg mass. And that's going to, generally speaking, you'd expect that to impede the growth of those embryos that are living in the depths of that jelly. So the reason that thing turns green is there's a symbiotic alga that grows inside the egg capsule, and it produces photosynthetic oxygen that is available to that developing embryo. And as the embryo grows and develops, it produces nitrogenous waste, nitrogen, and that fertilizes the alga. So it truly is a symbiotic arrangement. Now, that's very cool. Jim's trying to keep track of me over here, and I'm just making it really hard for him. I'm such a kinesthetic speaker, I can't get over it. It gets really weird. So the closest relative to these animals is the spotted salamander in the east, an absolutely beautiful beast. And they also have a symbiotic alga that also grows inside the egg capsule, but it turns out that eventually those eggs hatch out into a larva that's gill-breathing and living in the pond. Those algal cells can become encysted inside the larval tissues, and they remain photosynthetic. And it's been shown that the sugars that are produced by those photosynthetic algae are actually being taken up by the salamander larva. So you have this photosynthetic vertebrate out there. It's utterly bizarre. Now that's the spotted salamander, but this is a close relative, and I'm willing to bet my bottom dollar, not the house necessarily, but that the same thing's going on in our animals here. It's fantastic. It's a great story. Oh, we're on to breathtaking story number 4 already. Except I've lost count because my numbers don't make any sense anymore. The torrential grand slam. This is actually story number 3. The torrential grand slam. My second favorite salamanders. You could get a B in the class if you come up and tell me how much you love these. Okay. These are the torrent salamanders. All 4 species make one family of salamanders. There's the Columbia here, the southern torrent here. This is the one we have in our coast range out here, and the Olympic torrent salamander and the Cascade torrent salamander. Now, what's really amazing about those is even people like me can't tell them apart. They're morphologically really difficult to distinguish. There's a lot of variation amongst individuals, but if you went up to the Olympic Peninsula and grabbed one and put it next to one from out here in the Coast Range, I'd have a rough time, okay? And yet, so this was the challenge. We, Emily and I, wanted to find all 4 species, and they all look the same. Well, you could fake it, right? Be pretty easy. But I'm saying, what could be more fun than that? Fun facts to know about torrent salamanders. Those 2 animals, that's the Columbia torrent salamander, which, by the way, its scientific name is Rhycotriton kieseri, and it's named after my first serious salamander mentor, Jim Kieser, who taught forever his career up here at the University of Oregon and studied salamander chromosomes. So I've always really appreciated this one. And in somebody's hand, probably Emily's, there's an adult on the left and a larva on the right. And they look a lot alike, don't they? And they're about the same size, aren't they? That's really fascinating. And in fact, really, the only way you can tell is this guy has tiny little gills that you wouldn't be able to see because it's out of water. But notice how the head is flatter and rounder than this adult over here. This one's probably going to metamorphose in the next year or so. So the adults on top of that are nearly lungless. And it turns out they're pretty closely related to that whole lungless salamander family, which I think is fascinating. The larvae have these itsy bitsy little gills, these little pink stubs. The larval period is not 3 to 5 months. That's not a typo. It's 3 to 5 years. It takes them 3 to 5 years as larvae before they can metamorphose, depending on the species and even maybe the population. And I'm saying the larvae and adults are typically aquatic, and I might have, if I can remember to tell you a little more about that as we go along here, I will. But typically they're in these seeps and springs, so they require these cold water habitats, highly oxygenated, right? They have almost no lungs, so they can't breathe all that well. The larvae have almost no gills, so they don't have all that surface area for taking up dissolved oxygen out of the water. It needs to be a lot of oxygen in the water so they can get most of it through their skin. And what do you know about the oxygen content of water as it warms up? Go ahead, shout it out. Goes down, doesn't it? And that's what happens when these springs, when they log upstream or whatever happens, and the water temperature goes up like into the 50s or so, these salamanders can't make it, all right? They need that cold water and all that oxygen. So how do you tell the species apart? Well, teach yourself some fancy genetics. That's what I did. I spent 30 years doing that stuff. And you go sequence yourself a piece of DNA. And in this case, that's a piece of DNA from a bunch of torrent salamanders. from a gene that doesn't matter. It's a mitochondrial cytochrome B gene. And you line it up and you see how it differs. And so wherever you see an A or a G or a C down there in the column, that's a place that those animals differ in their DNA sequences right there. And you take that DNA and you can construct an evolutionary tree from it. And without belaboring the details over here, this is all 4 of our species. The most important feature about that is that even though they all look the same, there are these deep genetic differences among them. So it's really kind of counterintuitive, right? You wouldn't necessarily expect that. We tend to think when things get different, they just get different, the way they look and genetically and everything else. Not in this case. They're going, we like the way we look. We're going to stay that way. And nevertheless, their genome argues otherwise, and it starts to diverge. So that's what's happened. Southern torrent salamander's looking at us right now. He's not looking at you, he's looking at me. And he's going, get a grip. Do you not want to have any fun? I mean, come on, you know. And besides, do you really want to miss out on this huge cuteness factor? So there's another way to go about this, and it's a road trip, okay? You get out. Well, how do you do that? It turns out, fortunately, for those of us who can't tell the damn things apart, that all 4 species are distributed up and down the west coast here, and they're completely separate from one another. So there's the southern torrent salamander in yellow, the Columbia torrent salamander in green, Cascade torrent salamander here in blue, and finally up on the Olympic Peninsula, the Olympic torrent salamander. So all you need is a road map. You just need to know where you are. And so it may be true that not all who wander are lost, but if you're wandering and you're lost, you're not going to know what species of torrent salamander you have. All right? And besides, it takes you to these horrible places. I mean, it's really difficult, you know, to drive around and visit all these places. It's a rough job, really rough. In the end, of course, we were successful. And there's Emily. Now, this is what I need to say about Emily Poole. She's flat out amazing. She's an amazing artist, for one thing. She has no formal training in biology, even though she's completely encyclopedic about natural history, and you should all start watching for her book that's going to be out next year, a solo book. And she gets out there and she finds things in the damnedest places. And I think I know what I'm doing, but sometimes I know what I'm doing too much, you know? So I, for example, would never look for a torrent salamander anywhere other than a cold seeper spring or plunge pool, you know? We're up on the top of a ridge. I know hundreds of meters from the nearest water, and Emily picks up this mushroom of all things and says, "What's this?" And Kim came over and looked at it, and she's going, "Oh, I don't know, that looks like a torrent salamander," but that didn't make any sense because she's been listening to me for 41 years. And I went over and looked, and there it was, you know, it was a torrent salamander. And she's found them multiple times that way, clear the hell and gone up and away from the water. Well, they've got to move somehow. We know that. Otherwise, every torrent salamander that ever existed would be in the same spring that it ever was, right? So they move around, and they get up there away from the water. There's work going on right now up at H.J. Andrews Forest on the genetics of that whole system, but it's fascinating. And then one of the things I really love about Emily is she helps me think out of the box in a lot of ways, many ways. And she does great artwork. So that's actually a Columbia torrent salamander clinging to my thumb. And I think that's my thumb. I looked at it pretty carefully when I was making the slideshow, and if there's even a little blood on it. Whew. No, it's hard work. Somebody's got to do it, though. And so you're going to get a salamander poem. Unfortunately for you, I have enough time. It's called Triton. Sweet coltsfoot huddled in a wet, almost spring ditch. Ivory blossoms patient beneath red alder trunks. their lichens cast in perpendicular geographies of gray and white. Water weeps from somewhere high on the steep bank, flickering downward beneath sandstone cobbles softened by moss. Afternoon light carries cloud quilt, mist cling, subdued expectations. A stone upturned with care, hoping you might be there, and you are. A squirmy glisten, an extra finger curled in my palm, your back a smear of cocktail olive, belly an aging lemon, entire body scattershot with salt and pepper stipples. Columbia Torrent salamander, your name evokes plunging cascades rather than this shy peak of late winter water. An adult, perhaps 6 years old, recent miracle of transformation, hormones, changing a once homely, flat-headed child with nubbin gills to this. Head round as the end of my pinky, neck smoothing continuously into trunk. You climb onto my thumb, perhaps a better view. Dark eyes stare with childlike intensity into my dark eyes. Your mouth with corners upturned. We both seem to be smiling, but you can only be happy beneath that mossy rock, free to tell your silent tales of abduction and escape. You heard it first here. Okay, now we're on number 4. My toxic tale of citizen science. Part of this talk you might have heard years ago when I came in here and did a whole spiel on amphibian toxicity. But the star of the show is the rough-skinned newt. You probably would have guessed that. And the rough-skinned newt is aptly named because it has this really granular skin, and it's the salamander that most people see because they're out marching around in the middle of the day when most people are out marching around. And why can they be out marching around in the middle of the day? Because nothing can eat them. They're really toxic. Some rough-skinned newts have enough toxin in them to kill 10 to 20 adult humans. It's intense stuff. Like, how is that? So, works like this. That toxin's called tetrodotoxin, and this is a cartoon of, it's like a side view of your nerve cell, of one of your nerve cells. And every one of your nerve cells has channels going through it like that. And those channels are vastly important to the function of that nerve cell. Sodium ions have to go from the outside of the nerve cell to the inside to be able to conduct an impulse. That has to happen, and it happens in a wave down the nerve, okay? Enter tetrodotoxin, there it is. That stuff drops in there and blocks those, what they're called sodium channels, gated sodium, voltage sodium channels. It blocks them. Sodium can't do what it normally does, and as a result, that nerve won't conduct an impulse. And if that nerve won't connect an impulse, you forget how to do important things, like chew potato chips, for example, or breathe, for another example. Okay? What happens if you pick a rough-skinned newt up with your bare hands? Nothing. Except you become very happy. Because they're adorable too. Oh, the little ones, yeah, cute. Yeah, they're so cute. They'll be showing up sometime the end of the summer, early fall when they metamorphose. What happens if you eat a rough-skinned newt? You die. And you don't die happy. They're not hallucinogenic, and that stuff doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier, so you get to be aware of the full paralytic experience on your way out. Okay? Serious stuff. Don't believe it? Here's a medical account right here. 29-year-old man, approximately 150 milliliters of whiskey later. I have noticed that many rough-skinned newt accounts begin with alcohol, too much of it, and they often involve young males. Must be a correlation there. 6 p.m. he swallowed a 20-centimeter newt on a dare. That's also a common theme. And within minutes he complained of tingling lips. During the next 2 hours he began, I can't even read it, complaining of numbness, weakness, and he said he thought he was going to die. He refused to be transported to the hospital, and they left him alone, and 15 minutes later he went into full cardiopulmonary arrest and he was dead. Happens. Cautionary tale. And that's not the only one. That's just one I could easily snatch online. People who survive newt poisoning often wake up the next morning wondering whether they were still sick from the newt poisoning or from the alcohol they ingested before they ate the newt. But there are animals on the planet who can eat rough-skinned newts. Garter snakes, our local garter snakes. That's a red-spotted garter snake eating a rough-skinned newt. Now, that's a pretty good trick, because if you can eat one of those things, you got food for a month. If you're a garter snake, that's a big meal, okay? So how do they do that? And without taking a deep dive into the molecular biology of the whole system, I'll just say that their nerve channels, those sodium channels in their nerves, have evolved changes in those proteins that keep the tetrodotoxin from blocking them. It can't lodge in there. It's amazing. And red-spotted garter snakes are really good at it. Our other common garter snake here is the northwestern garter snake, and they're pretty okay at it, but not as good as red-spotted garter snakes are. And there's a whole lot more to tell about that system, but it turns out that where the newts and the garter snakes occur together, the newts tend to be really toxic and the garter snakes are resistant. Where the newts are there without the garter snakes, the newts lose their toxicity, and where there are garter snakes without newts, the garter snakes actually lose their resistance. It's fascinating what happens there. And that's a whole other story that's been told a lot in the annals of evolutionary biology. So other fun facts to know about that system: rough-skinned newts are actually immune to their own tetrodotoxin, which you would expect, right? So that was on your trivia exam. And what's amazing, and this was just discovered a few years back, the toxin itself is produced by a bacterium that lives on the newt's skin. They don't make it themselves. So what? It's amazing. How did the bacteria on the skin respond to the presence of garter snakes and make more of the stuff? How's that going on, you know? And the lab that's working on that has some funding to do. I hope they still have funding to do it. And it's an amazing system. The toxic tail part 2. A timeline for Tugman Park. Tugman Park is a block from my house in southeast Eugene. And it looks like this. In 1925, just up from Tugman Park, there was a dump. We dumped stuff all kinds of places in 1925. It was convenient, low place in the ground, and away it went, and they didn't care what it was, right? So in 1956, they finally decommissioned the dump, and they capped it over with a layer of soil. In 1995, lead started showing up, and these other contaminants. I mean, what could go wrong? There's only like batteries in there, you know. It was a terrible mess. And so the stuff was showing up in the creek, and it was showing up on the properties near the creek. And so the city of Eugene stepped in and started to do the cleanup. And the big thing from 1995 to 99, Tugman Creek ran right through there, and they diverted, rather than having a big Superfund site, and I really appreciate this, they just diverted the creek around the landfill. Now, when we moved in 1994, there were signs along the creek warning us to stay out of the water. And so by the time they finished that project, those signs went away. It really took care of most of the problem. And they also then took it another step further. In 2004, they did a whole restoration of the creek downstream. They added meanders to it. They built in some riparian vegetation, put boulders and logs, and added structure to it. All that was a really good thing for newts, it turns out. So in 2016, Bruce Newhouse, who some of you might know, environmental consultant here in town for a long time, put me in touch with Nearby Nature. You might also know something about Nearby Nature, an environmental education program, nonprofit that happens in Eugene. And we hatched this idea for the Wow Newts, or we call it the Newt Quest, all right? And we were all about teaching kids about newts and also counting every newt in Tugman Creek, which is really only about 3 blocks long. Okay, it's not really long, and it's small. And let me tell you, you get 20 kids out there, it can be done. So I had to cute you at the end. You know, I feel like the Pied Piper of Newton out there. I mean, all these kids in their rubber boots following me around. It's great fun, it really is. They have a blast. Here's one of my whoops, back. One of my helpers right here, and I'm not getting my buttons right here. She's got a newt in her hands. I mean, you can tell she's on death's door, right? Big trouble. Okay. Oh, so good. So I've just been super grateful to participate in the project. We've been counting newts now for 9 years, and I don't have the data for you, but I can tell you roughly what's going on. What we saw was a really steady increase for a lot of years. And it peaked about 3 years ago at about 96 newts. Now, we always count the same day, roughly the end of April every year. It's probably not the best time, but it's the same time, which is important to do it the same way every single year. So we peaked at about 96, and then starting year before last, it dropped way off. And then last year, it stayed down to about 26. Now, we're not statistically very robust here, but there's a big difference between 96 newts and 26 newts, all right? And people ask me, well, what is it? I don't know. I mean, they did just put in a big new water main under the street right across from Tugman Park that drains a new reservoir that EWEB put in up above us. I don't know what it is, but we're keeping track, so that's the good news. We're out there every year. We count newts. Come and join us. Last Saturday in April, we'll be there. And it became a chapter in the book called Neighborhood Newts. And I'm going to read the last 2 paragraphs of that to you. You get a little bit of a lead in right there. In his essay, Children in the Woods, Barry Lopez gave early credence to an idea I've championed for years, that the job of raising kids, the job for all of us growing up and growing older, is to become less self-centered, more inclusive. We can measure the quality of our lives to the extent that we invest in our connection with others. Other refers to all beings, human or not, animate or not. Other certainly refers to newts. This divestment of my internal self-absorbed child has become a lifelong process. I'm happy to say that both the rough-skinned newts and I have made progress. In the leaf-rotting rain of late winter, I stretch my arms wide in gratitude for the people who taught me to fall in love with science and the wonder of salamanders, for a future-thinking city that sent cleaner water flushing through my neighborhood, for an organization devoted to anchoring kids in their place, and for an opportunity to squat with children in the mud and show them another marvel in their local world. Mostly, I'm grateful for the persistence of rough-skinned newts. Toxic but not dangerous, waddling resolutely through the rain toward our neighborhood creek. Going to wrap it up. Big thanks to Coast Fork Watershed Council. Ray, Heather, Nayla, Jim, Amanda, you were here somewhere. Thank you very much for having me and for setting all of this up. It's really terrific. Thank you to the Axe and Fiddle. Thanks behind the bar. Thanks to the kitchen. Give it up for them. Do a great job. And all my salamander mentors over all the years, and I can't list them here. It's just too many years and too many people, but I really appreciate all of them. Emily Poole, you're amazing, and she's a great field trip companion and a great co-author. My wife, Kim, who somehow happened to make it here, she's also been incredibly loyal, and I appreciate her. And she actually loves salamanders, too. Maybe that's why we've been together for 41 years. I don't know. And finally, of course, the salamanders. Where would we be without them? And to you all, thank you for the gift of your ears and your eyes and for showing up tonight.